going with you.
It's that time of year again. No, not giving presents or spending time with family and singing carols. It's time to download one of the biggest games ever made. Literally, at over 300 gigabytes if all add-ons are chosen. And hone your online FPS skills with some frantic fragging and clandestine single-player wetwork. And more conspiracies than social media. From last gen to PS5 Pro, which platform delivers the frag fest best? Let's go dog.
Stand down!
Now with Treyarch pulling back from the previous ray tracing effects seen at the start of this generation of consoles and PC, Black Ops 6 targets a more conservative level of hardware requirements, evident in this still running on the 11-year-old Xbox One. The same IW9 engine is used here that powered the previous Modern Warfare 2 and 3 titles, rather than Treyarch's own bespoke IW3 branch, unique to Cold War. Visually, it's still solid if showing the age of that core IW engine underneath, which is starting to creak nearly as much as the hard drive you need to install it on. But due to the sheer amount of baked lighting, textures, materials and modular game front end and modes, the footprint and download time continues to be monstrous, as is the user experience. The near 12-year-old Xbox One brings up the smallest size, but still delivers a decent but sacrificed experience. Graphically, we have a limited set of options on PC and console, with scaling being tied heavily to frame rate, resolution and shadows. Now we start with the biggest market share. Settings wise, we look to have parity across all these consoles. Dual modes of 120Hz on or off deliver a 120 or 60 FPS frame rate cap, with tearing if not hooked up to a VRR screen, or tear free as shown here, thanks to my capture card supporting 4K 120 with VRR. Now, I did note a lack of screen space shadows on PS5, but this appears to be possibly a bug, as a restart of the game enabled these at times. Now, even with these concessions, both amateur consoles do not lock to 60 FPS. Note here, the frame drops are not 100% to what is presented on screen for VRR players, as the game engine is able to refresh outside of every 60 milliseconds as per my capture. But even with tearing, we can drop frames and tear during firefights, with both consoles dipping into the mid-50s at worst, often when fill rate or bandwidth limited, but generally they deliver a solid 60 FPS line, but some dips do occur on both, and they come out with almost identical metrics across the board. Now the PS5 Pro never deviates from this line, in my tests at least, holding a locked 60 FPS aside the checkpoint sections, which cause 60 millisecond spikes on both PS5 and PS5 Pro, but these do not occur on either Xbox Series consoles. The only benefit noted was the PS5 Pro can run with a higher base resolution, which is possibly the DRS range or that sparse rendering solution working better. It still runs between the same ranges most likely, but unlike the other two consoles, that base never drops below 1080p from my counts. Now the 120Hz mode does much better. Now hovering between the mid-70s and 100, it plays and looks much better. Like the 60 FPS mode though, not much splits them, with a minor advantage to PS5 in some sections and Xbox Series X in others, with overall averages between them in these aligned play sessions being less than 2%. As noted, the PS5 can stutter slightly more when auto-saving, presented as 50 to 70 millisecond spikes on the graph. Changing mode seems to lower the DRS bounds now, as both deliver a full 3840 by 2160 output using FSR2 from the lowest bounds of 1920 by 1080 in that 60 FPS mode, and a lowest of 1280 by 720 in that 120 FPS mode, effectively scaling from ultra performance to quality in play. But expect the 120Hz mode to be, on average, a lower base resolution, but image quality is noisy in all modes on all platforms due to the extensive sparse rendering and dithered shading used on post effects alpha and such. Thus, the hit to IQ is small relative to the big potential boost in frame rates and input latency. For example, the 120Hz mode can offer a best case 40 milliseconds of input latency versus 58 milliseconds in the 60 FPS mode. Both are great, but the 120Hz mode with VRR is a clear winner here, offering a significantly smoother and faster experience, both being over 70% faster in this mode on average.
Come on, Case, I need you!
Again, the PS5 Pro boosts this with a very good lock on 120 FPS. It can dip to the same high 80s at worst, Bandwidth limited and those checkpoint stutters most likely, but the average is close to 120 FPS, and if the console had a 144Hz mode, this would likely increase that gap further. As far as high frame rates go, the PS5 Pro gets very close to my other PC performance tests, and like the base PS5 and Series X, all are a drastic improvement over the last generation versions, and even the Xbox Series S covered next. Now the little white console offers the same modes, aside a reduction in LOD slightly and no screen space shadows at all. The biggest cost is performance and resolution, targeting the same 2560 by 1440 output using FSR2, which seems to use the entire gamut in both modes, lowest count being 853 by 480 approximately, but expect this count more often in the 120Hz mode, which is reinforced in the small boost to performance it offers over that 60 FPS mode. At times, they can be only a few percentage or frames per second apart, with the best case in my range of tests being 40% faster, but it's often around 10 to 15% faster than the 60 FPS mode. But due to the 8 millisecond frame time offered here, the input latency and general fluidity is better. VRR is the best, but even with tearing, the choice of 120Hz is best. But the gap to Series X and PS5 is pretty large, with it often being close to the VRR lower bounds in heavy action at 60 FPS, making the 120 FPS mode my recommended way to play if you can across all formats possible. It ends up being 26.7% faster in that 120Hz mode with VRR.
Get away from me!
Bringing up the rear in the Xbox One, and the cutbacks are in many places. Textures, alpha, LOD, SSR and shadows, reduced light sources, geometry and even animations are missing due to the tiny memory limits offered here. Resolution and frame rates complete the culling, but here we have no VRR to save the retinas, and as such we see a closer 30 FPS readout than 60. Now the console manages to not have the noisiest image quality of the lot. That award goes to the Xbox Series S due to the game's low base resolution and general image instability caused by the team's rendering choices and post-processed heavy image. On the X1, many of these are reduced or disabled, so it suffers less with instability, and at 600 by 900 target final resolution, that is often half that on both axes, which leaves an image that is more stable than the Series S, but worse due to the lower effects, shading quality, more dithering and lower texture quality. Although texture quality can be hit and miss, with at times even the Series X having worse quality than the Series S. Performance is low, with input being heavy and feeling a far cry from the earlier COD titles such as Modern Warfare 2 and others on this very console. The game is still very memory bound on this machine though, and it has much longer stutters than even on the PS5 version here, where you can see pauses down to 0 FPS for about a second and a half at its worst point. So just be aware that this version can have some long pauses at certain points during play, again via those autosaves or memory management. You still get to enjoy the game's open level design, the campaign and branching NPC chats with that popular multiplayer thrown in, but if you are playing online, then this version would put you at a distinct disadvantage over any of the current gen or PC versions. Well, so long as you had a PC better than the Xbox One, that is. And PC brings up the end of this comparison, and is always the case, your specs will determine the level here, but my Nvidia RTX 4080 Super and my AMD RX 6800 both deliver superior image quality or performance to even the PS5 Pro. The highest settings on PC are close to the same as consoles, but resolutions can scale above the levels available on consoles. The menu choices are not exhaustive: resolution, frame rate, HDR and VSync, and a preset of graphical options that can be customized with a selection of sub options therein. And then a full suite of frame generation and reconstruction ranging from FSR1 right through to Nvidia's DLSS 3. GPU wise, VRAM 8GB card should be fine to max things out at the top, but if you are struggling with VRAM, it does give you a clear view in the menu settings. In terms of optimal settings, the biggest savers are screen space, reflections and shadows, saving you 20% combined going from highest to lowest. But fundamentally, shadows, screen space, reflections and volumetrics are the ones you want to tweak most to get slightly more performance, which you can see on screen in my optimal settings. And compare this to the highest level of performance, going from native 4K at maximum settings, we hover below 60 FPS in a stressful scene as shown, but by moving to my optimal settings you gain 12% back on that with almost no visual cost, taking 55 to 64 FPS. The biggest improvement though comes from engaging FSR3 or DLSS3 quality. We can gain back a further 14% on that with a slightly better image on details and clarity, but a small hit to foliage flicker and specular noise, and some increased shimmering on shadows, specifically screen space shadows. But now we are running at 71 FPS, almost 30% faster than 4K Extreme for a tiny hit to image quality, but a large boost to performance on my RX 6800 and 5600X PC. If you wish to gain more, you can move to balance or drop to 1440p, which will boost the game into the 100 plus FPS range on this or equal machinery.
Everyone all right?
My RTX 4080 Super can run at native 1440p extreme settings at 144 FPS target, and this is the sharpest and smoothest way to play. It can dip below 120 FPS, but remains safely above 100 FPS most of the time in all tested sections, enabling optimal settings and DLSS 3, which may even include frame generation if desired. At these base performance levels, we'll see this level of GPU and CPU comfortably running close or into the 200 FPS range, and due to the game's core rendering IQ issues, as covered earlier, the impact to overall image quality is practically invisible, but response is very fast now, dropping to the low 30 milliseconds for input latency. Compared to the Xbox One, for example, the increase is staggering, but obviously smaller to the PS5 and Xbox Series X 120Hz mode, but input latency in this game is one of the big reasons it always feels so good. The game remains one of the biggest sellers year on year, but in reality the technology within is starting to become static as the core yet addictive gameplay. The quality of the Xbox One version demonstrates this best, as underneath the higher frame rates, resolution and some effects, the core gaming engine is still rooted in those last generation machines. The PS5 Pro is only supported, it seems, by boosted BC at best, then any direct patch update, and although smoother and sharper, it's not a title you'd want to sell the new £700 console to your friends with. It has some good moments, a push on the gameplay and design, but the image quality issues, relatively low performance for the hardware, certainly on PC and higher end console, and the huge install size leave a mixed impact of both quality and technology across all formats. And that's it for another deep dive and fast look into games, Call of Duty and all things technology related. Remember, if you like what we do here on IGN Performance Reviews, then keep it IGN. We'll catch you on the next one.